My disaster had 3 levels. First, she was stunningly beautiful. Second, she worked in my house. And third, which turned the first 2 into a catastrophe, she never smiled. Not at me, not at my mother, not at the guests, not even at my little cousin, who managed to break an antique vase and was forgiven by every woman within a 10-mile radius, simply for his Puss in Boots eyes. He didn't even get a shadow of her sympathy. Elena Moreau simply lowered her gaze, responded with surgical politeness, and continued performing her domestic miracles until interrupted. 3 weeks after her arrival, I realized I was doomed. Not because something had happened between us. Quite the opposite. Nothing happened. No flirtation, no accidental softness, not a single secret sign for a normal man to latch onto to preserve the remnants of his dignity. Elena was just there. Perfect, composed, and absolutely disinclined to encourage the thoughts that entered my head every time she walked down the hallway with fresh linens in her arms. Our house was too big for us. It wasn't a royal residence, but there was enough space to maintain the illusion of aristocratic primness. My mother called it a respectable family nest. I called it too many stairs. With Elena's arrival, everything became quieter. Before, the house was full of noise. My father's calls, my mother's orders, the stomping of my sister Claire, who moved through rooms as if every door had personally insulted her. But when Elena entered, the chaos self-organized around her silence. Things stopped falling, tablecloths smoothed themselves out, and dust seemed to retreat in terror. I noticed her on the 2nd day. I fell for her for real, on the 10th. It was breakfast. My mother was reading mail, pretending to be busy with something important. My father was drinking his 2nd coffee and enjoying his first bad mood of the day. Claire was boring a hole through the fruit bowl with her gaze, as if vitamins had betrayed her ideals. Elena stood by the sideboard, pouring tea. Just pouring tea. But I couldn't stop watching. The movement of her wrist, how the morning light fell on the line of her neck, how simply and yet elegantly her hair was styled. I stared too long. Not in an actorly way, but in the style of a hopelessly lost idiot. My mother, who had a son's stupidity radar built into her DNA, noticed first. "Elena, bring Adrian more toast," she said, shifting her gaze from me to the maid. Elena turned around. No emotion, just professional calm. "Yes, madam." That voice. Low, soft, impeccable. I buried my face in my plate because eye contact at that moment seemed like a legal risk. A second later, a plate appeared next to my hand. "Here you are, sir." I couldn't help it and looked up. She was standing so close that I could smell cleanliness. Not perfume, but soap, starch, and that composure I would never achieve. "Thank you," I forced out. She held my gaze for a fraction of a second, nodded almost imperceptibly, and walked away. No blush, no smile, just toast. And that was the worst part. When a woman gives you absolutely no foothold for fantasies, your imagination starts behaving inappropriately. Right after breakfast, Claire caught me in the hallway. "You were staring at the maid. You are the embodiment of spiritual evil." "But I'm right. You looked at her as if you'd seen a woman with bread for the first time in your life." Claire crossed her arms. "She's pretty, but forget it. For her, human emotions are just trash someone else should clean up." Unfortunately, that sounded like the truth. Over the next few days, I became obsessed with details. How she tied her apron, how perfectly she folded napkins, as if a crease out of place was a mortal sin. How she answered my father with deference, my mother with efficiency, and Claire with the patience usually reserved for natural disasters. And me? I was a puzzle to her. She was polite and nothing more. "Good morning, sir." Your jacket is in the library. Would you like coffee? You should eat before you leave. That last phrase nearly finished me off one Thursday. I had already grabbed my keys when Elena appeared in the hall with laundry. She gave me a quick once-over and stated, "You haven't eaten." "What? You missed lunch." "How do you know? You weren't in the dining room, and you get irritable when you skip meals." I froze. She already knew my habits better than I did. For a moment, I thought her gaze softened. Not a smile, God forbid, just a tiny shadow of something human. Then the mask slid back into place. "Noticing such things is part of my job, sir." "You can call me Adrian," I blurted out. A pause. She didn't move, but her gaze changed. "That would be inappropriate. I work here." There it was, the wall. Not rude, but monolithic. "You turn every interaction into a diplomatic crisis," I observed, leaning against the doorframe. "That's because your family often confuses comfort with permission for familiarity." Whoa, that was honesty. I looked at her more closely, at that frozen face behind which hid exhaustion, buried under layers of professionalism. She wasn't cold because she liked it. The distance was her protection. "I'm not them," I said quietly. Elena smiled faintly, bitterly. "That phrase is usually said by people who want to feel special at someone else's expense." That was a blow to the gut, accurate and deserved. I spent the whole evening thinking about her tone. Not warm, not intimate, but not indifferent either. And that was the beginning of my real problems. After the kitchen incident, I came to a conclusion, deeply mistaken and provocatively arrogant, that Elena behaved so harshly only because no one in this house had bothered to talk to her like a normal person. I decided to be the one to crack the code. My family wasn't evil. They were worse. They were accustomed. My mother gave orders in that impeccable tone that supposedly erases hierarchy, but in fact only emphasizes it. My father rarely even looked up. For him, Elena was something like an animated piece of furniture that brought coffee on time. Claire treated her with the same impatience she treated the whole world, from bad weather to dessert served at the wrong time. Elena handled this brilliantly. She was too perfect, never fussy, never rude, never got personal. If she were colder, I would have hated her. If warmer, I could have handled the attraction. But she was precise, and that's far more dangerous. I decided to become inevitable. I started popping up everywhere, lingering at breakfast, reading in the library exactly when she was dusting the shelves, and accidentally ending up in the hallways she had to pass through. But Elena didn't thaw. On the contrary, she became even more composed. On Wednesday afternoon, I nearly knocked her off her feet in the narrow hallway by the linen closet. She was carrying a stack of towels so high, she could barely see where she was going. I managed to catch the top towel before it slid to the floor. For a second, we were too close. I was still holding the edge of the stack, and she was looking me straight in the eye, without fear, but with clear disapproval. "Thank you," she said. That voice again, controlled, polite, turning simple gratitude into distance. "You know," I didn't let go of the towel. "You do everything to make any interaction with you look like a diplomatic reception. No one your age should say, 'I'm sorry, sir,' with such a serious face." Elena carefully took the towel from my hands. "I work here." That sounded like a warning. It was. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her rearrange the linens. Her movements were impossibly precise. "Do I annoy you?" I asked directly. She froze, didn't turn around, didn't answer right away. But after a moment, she said, "Yes, you take everything lightly." That hit my pride harder than I expected. I don't take everything lightly. You take me lightly. You talk to me as if it costs you nothing, as if this interaction has no price. I straightened up. There was truth in her words that I didn't want to admit. For me, our interaction was an interesting game. For her, it was daily maneuvering on the edge of professional risk. Maybe there shouldn't be a price, I noted quietly. There is, she snapped. In that moment, I understood. Elena wasn't just reserved. She was protecting herself. Her coldness had a history. I looked at her, at that frozen face, at hands that never trembled, and suddenly everything fell into place. She had built this distance long before I appeared. It was her fortress. Has someone in this house made you feel uncomfortable? I asked, my voice harder than I intended. Elena froze. Her face became impenetrable. That's not a question you should be asking. That depends on the answer. No, she finally looked at me. It depends on your position. I'm not like you. I'm not them, Elena. She smiled bitterly, almost imperceptibly. That phrase is always said by people of your circle when they want to believe their good intentions matter more than the consequences. I fell silent. She had hit the bullseye. In this house, smelling of old wood and expensive perfume, I was the one who had the luxury of considering intentions meaningful, and she was the one who lived in a world of consequences. Do you consider me a problem? I asked. Elena adjusted the last napkin on the shelf and turned to me. I consider you the kind of problem that seems harmless until it's too late. She walked past, nearly brushing my shoulder, and I caught the faint scent of starch and soap. The hallway was empty, but her "too late" still hung in the air. I realized two things. First, she had seen right through me. And second, she was defending herself against me with such fervor precisely because I already had started to become something more to her than just a harmless problem. After our conversation at the linen closet, I made the classic mistake of a love-struck idiot. I decided to become inevitable for Elena. I started popping up everywhere, hoping my constant presence would make her walls crumble. But Elena didn't give in. Instead, she switched to total surveillance mode. She began noticing details about me that I didn't even know about myself. It was frightening, effective, and damn sexy. It all started on Thursday morning. I was coming down the stairs, struggling with my jacket collar, when Elena emerged from the dining room with an empty tray. She stopped, gave me a quick once-over, and said,
"Today you should have strong coffee, the one in the right-hand pot."
I froze on the step. And why's that?
"You slept badly,"
she stated, adjusting the tray. How can you be so sure?
"You look irritated even before you've said your first word."
I wanted to argue, but realized she was right. I had indeed spent half the night staring at the ceiling, replaying her phrase about harmless problems. Is it part of your job description to diagnose me?
"Part of my job is to make sure everything in this house runs smoothly,"
she replied calmly and walked past, wafting the scent of fresh starch. In the afternoon, I decided to lay low in the garden with a book, pretending to be deeply engrossed in philosophy, rather than her silhouette flickering in the second-floor windows. Elena appeared on the path with a clothespin basket. She didn't even slow down when she tossed out, "You've been on the same page for 20 minutes. I looked up. Are you watching me? No. That was too fast a no for me to believe it. It's just that when you're actually reading, you always fold the corner of the page. She finally stopped and looked at me. Right now, the book is lying flat. You're just staring into space. I closed the book. This is getting creepy. It's called observation, sir. The third incident happened late in the evening. I had returned from town after meeting friends. The hall was lit with dim light, smelling of wax and lemon polish. Elena was locking the silver cabinet. She turned at the sound of my footsteps and frowned. "You had an awful dinner." "Excuse me?" I even stopped. "You smell of frying oil and cheap starch." It was fast food. "Do you now identify my life choices by scent?" "I identify the causes of your future heartburn." She tucked the key into her apron pocket. "And you have a headache." I involuntarily touched my temple. My head was indeed splitting. "You do realize knowing that is almost indecent." "Knowing it saves me from having to listen to your complaints tomorrow morning." The next morning, Claire, my insufferable sister, caught me in the hallway with a sly grin. "See? Elena put 2 ibuprofen tablets next to your coffee." I looked at the table. There was indeed a glass of water and the tablets. "So? That's just service." "Brother," Claire patted my shoulder. "Service is when they bring you breakfast. Knowing your pain level before you've even opened your eyes? That's intimacy. Just in gloves." I looked at those tablets and understood. Her coldness no longer seemed like distance to me. It was discipline. She didn't allow herself to feel, but she allowed herself to notice. And that was the greatest danger. Because Elena wasn't just doing her job. She was studying me with the same meticulousness with which I was studying her. That day, I realized one thing that nearly cost me the last shreds of my sanity. Elena was much softer with me than with everyone else. Before, I had thought the opposite. I believed she was biased toward me and normal toward everyone else. But once I started observing her interactions with others, my entire worldview turned upside down. At breakfast, my father asked for more coffee. Elena answered with a short, "Yes, sir," not raising her eyes. No dialogue, no spark, just a perfectly tuned function. When my mother asked about the flower delivery, Elena gave a minute, accurate report. Dry facts, zero emotion. Even with my insufferable sister Claire, she was the embodiment of icy patience. To the question, "Where is my green sweater?" came the laconic answer, "In the wash," and not a drop of the sarcasm she usually bestowed upon me. With them, she was a flawless machine, polite, efficient, but absolutely absent. And with me? With me, she always left room for an extra word, a little pause, a sharp remark, a personal adjustment to my plans. I was her only deviation. The chance to test my theory came on Sunday, when my mother hosted one of her social lunches. 3 ladies in silk scarves discussing charity as if planning a military operation. One of the guests lost an earring, of course. She wailed as if the world were ending. Elena was helping her search in the hallway. I stood in the library doorway and listened. "Are you sure it's not here?" the guest asked capriciously. "I've inspected the area twice, madam." Elena's voice was as flat as a dead man's EKG. No trace of irritation, no hint of irony. Emptiness. A couple of minutes later, I found the wretched earring under an armchair in the library and went out into the hall. "Here it is," I handed the jewelry to the guest. She showered me with thanks and floated off to the living room. Elena looked at me. "You shouldn't have interfered." I smirked. "And that's it? No, thank you, my hero?" "It's an observation. You could have just given it to me." "Oh." I leaned against the wall. "There she is, my favorite Elena." "What does that mean?" "It means that with everyone else, you're a robot, but with me, you're still a living person, even if a prickly one." She said nothing, but I noticed her shoulders tense for a fraction of a second. That was a success. The final proof came a couple of days later. Claire brought her friends, loud girls who behaved in our house as if it were an extension of a nightclub. One of them, Sophia, leaned over the railing and called out to me. "Adrian, are you free on Saturday?" Elena was passing below with the tray at that moment. She didn't slow her step, didn't look up, didn't react at all. But an hour later, when I went into the kitchen for water, she said without turning around. "You're not free on Saturday." I froze in the doorway. "Excuse me? You have lunch with your grandmother. How do you... Your mother mentioned it yesterday. It would be inefficient if you gave Sophia a false promise." She was cutting fruit with such surgical precision that I felt uneasy. "That sounded like jealousy, Elena. That sounded like concern for the schedule." She finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, but I saw that same crack in them. "You had a choice. Stay silent as you would have with Claire or my father." I stepped closer. "But you couldn't help yourself. Why?" Elena put down the knife. "Because your sister's friends are excessively intrusive." That was a bad lie, I smiled. She didn't answer, returning to her work. But now I knew for certain. Her coldness toward me was not indifference. It was a titanic effort. She wasn't an icy maid. She was a woman trying with all her might to appear like an icy maid, precisely around me. And the harder she tried, the more obvious her failure became. The first real crack in her armor appeared with a drop of blood. It wasn't an epic battle or a grand gesture, just a sharp knife, a juicy apple, and a moment's loss of concentration. It happened on a rainy Tuesday. The house seemed unusually empty. My father was stuck in the city, my mother had driven off to another committee meeting, and Claire had vanished with her friends. I was wandering the hallways until I ended up in the kitchen. Soft classical music flowed from the speaker by the window. A violin, too elegant for domestic bustle, but perfectly suited to Elena. She was standing at the far table, cutting fruit for dessert. I leaned against the doorframe. "Do you always work with such pompous accompaniment? Or is this Vivaldi my personal bonus?" She didn't flinch. Nothing in the world seemed capable of making her lose composure. But her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. She realized she wasn't alone in the room. "You're early today, sir." "In your mouth, that sounds like a reproach." "In my mouth, it sounds like a statement of fact." I smiled and stepped closer. And at that moment, fate, which had a sadistic sense of humor, decided to intervene. The knife slipped. Elena inhaled sharply, short, almost soundless. "Elena?" She immediately put down the knife and tried to hide her hand behind her back, as if she could conceal an injury with posture alone. "It's fine." "There's blood." "It's just a finger." "One usually follows from the other." I crossed the kitchen before she could protest and carefully took hold of her wrist. This was our first real physical contact. Not an accidental brush in the hallway, not a passed plate. I was holding her hand, firmly but gently. Elena froze. I felt her muscles tense, felt her gaze, usually cold and distant, dart to my face with genuine, unguarded surprise. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "You're hurt." I ignored her protest, examining the cut. "It's not fatal." Reassuring, but let's avoid gangrene. I grabbed a clean towel and wrapped it around her finger. She didn't resist. And that was the second crack. Not the cut itself, but her permission for my help, even if she hadn't planned to give it. I tied the makeshift bandage and looked up. She was looking at me as if she had no idea what to do with this situation. There was no anger or coyness in her eyes, just bewilderment. "You really hate it when people help you," I noted quietly. Elena looked down at her bandaged hand. "No," she answered after a moment. "I hate being indebted by kindness to people who might misinterpret it." That confession knocked the ground out from under my feet. It contained the essence of her entire strategy. Not coldness, not arrogance, safety. "And am I among those people?" I asked, still not releasing her wrist. She looked me straight in the eye. "You are exactly the person I need to be 10 times more careful with." I chuckled softly. That sounds too personal for an icy maid. It is. She finally freed her hand gently, not sharply, just reestablishing that same distance she could justify to herself. But the magic of the moment had already worked. We stood in the kitchen, and the air between us had become too heavy and hot for an ordinary master-servant relationship. You know, I leaned against the counter, watching her try to return to work with one hand. For someone who insists on professionalism, you sometimes say extremely compromising things. Elena was wiping blood off the cutting board, not looking at me. That's because you insist on standing too close when I'm vulnerable. That phrase became the final chord of the chapter. Now I knew for certain. Elena was careful with me, not because I was indifferent to her, but because my presence did something to her defenses that she couldn't control. I stayed in the kitchen, poured her tea. She accepted it without argument, and we spent 10 minutes in a strange, altered climate where every word weighed more than before. I understood that Elena was not an impregnable fortress. She was just a woman who had been building walls for too long, and was now afraid of what would happen if they fell. Once I realized that Elena's distance was not indifference but precaution, I stopped perceiving her reserve as a challenge. Now it was a language I needed to learn. Coldness repels those who don't matter. Caution protects against those who do. And that knowledge made my position 10 times more dangerous. I began to notice what had previously escaped my attention. Her tiredness. Not physical weakness, but the colossal effort it took to maintain the mask of the perfect professional. You don't stand so straight and speak so precisely if life hasn't taught you how costly any mistake in tone can be. I found her in the laundry room. It was hot, smelling of steam and freshly laundered cotton. Elena was folding table linens with such fanatical precision, as if preparing them for inspection by the general staff. You always look like you're conducting educational work with textiles, I observed, leaning against the doorframe. Fabric is much more pliable than people, she replied without turning around. That sounds like the motto of a disappointed sociopath. It sounds like experience. I walked further into the room. Elena continued working, corner to corner, seam to seam. Who taught you that any softness will inevitably be misinterpreted? Her hands stopped, not gradually, but instantly, as if a gear had jammed in the mechanism. She slowly turned around. In the dim light of the utility room, her gaze was direct and frighteningly honest. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. Men in houses like yours often confuse basic politeness with a personal invitation. There it was, the answer, simple, bitter, and devoid of all drama. She wasn't playing the Ice Queen for fun. She was building an architecture of safety. Every layer of her formality, every sir, and every crisply ironed napkin was a brick in the wall protecting her from the special attention of people like me. In this house too? My voice grew quieter. She didn't answer directly, which was more eloquent than any list of grievances. My jaw clenched involuntarily. "Don't look like that, Adrian." She called me by my name for the first time without prompting, and it sounded almost like a warning. Like what? With that noble anger of yours, it doesn't help. I stepped forward, closing the distance to the edge of the table. You were never cold, Elena. You were just on guard. She held my gaze. A second stretched, turning into something more than just a pause in conversation. I'm not trying to win against your caution, I continued. I don't need a victory in this game. I'm interested in you, the real you, beneath this apron and the rules you wrote for yourself. Her fingers tightened on the tablecloth. For a moment, vulnerability flickered across her face. Real, unguarded vulnerability, the kind she had so carefully hidden behind professionalism. That's exactly the proposition I've been trying to prevent, she whispered. It seems your plan has failed. It seems I'm just tired of pretending this doesn't affect me. That evening, I left the laundry room with the realization that everything had changed. I no longer wanted to solve her mysteries or crack her defenses. I wanted her to feel safe next to me. And once a man reaches that point, there's no going back to just liking someone. Sincerity in our house usually only sprouted when provoked by an outsider, preferably one wearing pearls and holding a glass of expensive Chardonnay. My mother hosted another dinner party. This time, there were few guests, but the level of pretentiousness was off the charts. I was standing in the hallway when one of the invited ladies, giving Elena an appraising look, loudly whispered to my mother, "Your new maid is quite striking. Where did you find her? Just make sure the men in the house don't get too distracted." It was the kind of phrase that makes your teeth ache with anger. The most unbearable part was that Elena didn't even flinch. She froze by the serving table with a tray in her hands, her face completely impassive, as if the comment had shattered against her invisible shield. I intercepted her in the hallway before she could enter the dining room. "Elena." "Yes, sir." "That armor again, even harder than usual. Give me the tray." She frowned slightly. "That's unnecessary." As are half the people in that room. Our fingers touched under the base of a glass, and that contact was like a short circuit. "I want to talk to you after dinner," I said quietly, "about how I'm no longer going to let your caution decide for the two of us." Elena looked at me point blank. There was no fear in her eyes, only a heavy, exhausting weariness. "You're making a mistake, Adrian." "I know, and it's the best mistake of my life." When the last guest had departed and the house sank into that ringing silence that always follows feigned merriment, I found her in the kitchen. The kitchen was generally the only place in this mansion where anything real happened. She was standing by the sink, already without her apron, in a simple dark dress with rolled-up sleeves. Her hair had escaped a little from its style, giving her that look that took my breath away. "You should go to sleep," she said without turning around. "You once advised me not to insist." It was good advice, but I ignored it. I stepped closer. This time, I wasn't going to play guessing games. "I don't want you because you work in my house," I began. "Not because of the uniform, not because of this distance of yours, and not because it seems like forbidden fruit. I want you, not the maid Elena, but you yourself." This was the moment of truth. She stopped hiding. In her gaze, I saw everything at once: fear, a shadow of the hope she so hated, and exhaustion from eternal defense. "You can't want me in the way I need," she whispered. "Then tell me what way you need." "I need to know that I'm not a passing whim for you, not a trophy to romanticize a boring household." It was an open wound formed into words. She was afraid that when the thrill passed, she would be left alone in this kitchen with all the consequences. I closed the remaining distance between us, stopping close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "I've never wanted anything less than all of you. With all your habit of checking whether I've eaten, and your unwillingness to acknowledge your own kindness." I carefully touched her wrist. She didn't pull away. This time, her fingers didn't clench into a fist. They trembled almost imperceptibly. "You're very insufferable when you get serious," she whispered. "That sounds like a good sign." I kissed her, slowly, almost asking permission. Elena responded with the same restraint she brought to everything she did, but beneath that icy crust lay something far hotter and hungrier than I could have imagined. When we pulled apart, she looked almost angry. "This isn't funny," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's absolutely serious." That night, the wall finally collapsed. Not under pressure, but under the weight of inevitability. We were no longer master and servant. We were two people who had finally stopped lying to each other in the darkness of an empty kitchen. Nothing changes perception of space quite like a secret infatuation. Our entire huge, prim mansion suddenly began to resemble a minefield, where around every corner lurked either the risk of exposure or the chance for a stolen second of closeness. The strangest thing was that outwardly, almost nothing had changed. By day, Elena remained the same flawless Elena, perfectly ironed collar, hair pinned up, and a gaze capable of freezing boiling water. She placed my morning coffee with the same professional detachment as 3 weeks ago. But now I knew what lay behind that posture, and, far more importantly, she knew that I knew. Now, our interactions had turned into an exquisite game. In the library, she might walk past my chair and barely audibly whisper, "You're reading too slowly again." To any casual witness, it would sound like a remark, but to me, it was pure flirtation. Once, when my mother was in the room, Elena silently straightened my tie. She did it with such a matter-of-fact air that no one suspected a thing, but at that moment, I nearly forgot how to breathe. Claire, of course, figured us out first. 3 days later, she cornered me on the stairs. "You're hopeless, brother," she declared with a triumphant grin. "That's not informative, Claire. You're smiling at walls, or rather, at the places where Elena was standing 5 minutes ago. Under the sibling law, that's equivalent to a full confession." I didn't argue. Denying the obvious to my sister was useless. She fed on my slip-ups. At some point, I realized I was no longer interested in cracking her defenses. Before, every conversation we had was a challenge for me, an attempt to probe the boundaries. Now I wanted the opposite, to protect the Elena who had finally decided to come out of her fortress. One evening, we found ourselves alone in the pantry. My mother had sent her to check the supplies, and I had accidentally come in for water. Elena was arranging jars on a shelf. "You've gotten quieter," she observed without turning around. "Is that a complaint?" "It's an observation. You've stopped trying to make me simpler." "I suppose I've just stopped wanting you to be simple." She turned around. In the dim light of the pantry, away from prying eyes, her mask finally slipped. She looked at me the way she looked at no one else in this house, without armor. "You're handling this much better than I planned," she admitted. "You had a plan?" "I had concerns." She stepped closer and adjusted my collar with 2 fingers. That gesture carried more weight than any impassioned speech. The finale came 2 weeks later. My parents had left, Claire had fled to her friends, and the house sank into that rare, almost sacred silence when masks and roles become unnecessary. I found her in the small drawing room. She was folding fresh linens by the window. Hearing my footsteps, she looked up and, without warning, without irony, without protection, smiled. It was a real smile, soft, warm, and entirely hers. My knees literally went weak. "That should be illegal," I breathed from the doorway. "I'm just trying to be reckless," she replied. I crossed the room and stopped right in front of her. She placed her palms on my chest and said quietly, "You know what I hate most? Is this a trap? That you were right. I was never cold with you. I was just scared." I put my arms around her, trying not to scare away the moment. She rested her forehead against my shoulder and whispered, "You've ruined this house for me. Now it feels empty when you're not in the room. I didn't fall in love with a fantasy or a maid's uniform. I fell in love with the woman hiding behind it all. Observant, honest, and endlessly cautious." Elena remained herself. She was still reserved in public and didn't approve of loud scenes. But with me, she had changed. Her "you should eat before you leave" no longer sounded like a duty. Now it was love, translated into the language of care. I fell in love with the unapproachable maid, and in the end, I found the only person next to whom I no longer had to play the role of the family heir. It turned out that the most dangerous place in our house is any room where she is. But honestly, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
She doesn't smile, not at me, no. She walked into the house and the noise rearranged. Dust retreated, tablecloth smooth. The air itself changed. She never smiled, not at the guests, not at the boy with the eyes. Just yes sir, yes madam, clean and precise. I watched her pour the morning tea with the grace of a vow, and my mother caught me staring. Oh, she clocked it somehow. Bring Adrian more toast, and she did without a word. Set it down so close to me, I forgot what I'd heard. She said, I'm not them, I'm not your family's mistake. Said men in houses like yours always make that take. And I felt the wall, oh, the wall she'd been building, brick by brick by brick. Oh, every careful filling beneath the apron, oh, beneath the rules. She was warmer than a wall, oh, but smarter than the fools. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the start, she was guarding something soft that I had no right to mark. She wasn't cold, she was careful, oh, careful as a vow. And I wanted her to know I'd never make her wonder how. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the name, I just wanted her to feel like I wasn't there to claim. Beneath the apron, oh. She knew when I hadn't slept, knew when I hadn't ate, knew the page I'd folded down, knew the headache in my gait. Left 2 pills beside my coffee like she'd done it all her life. And my sister grinned and whispered, brother, that's a wife. Cut her finger in the kitchen on a Tuesday in the rain. I held her wrist and she let me, and she didn't quite explain, but she said, I hate being indebted by kindness to a man who might misread it. And I finally understood her plan. She wasn't cold, she was tired of the cost of every soft thing she'd given, of every soft thing lost. And I felt the wall, oh, but I felt the crack. And I swore, oh, I swore I wasn't here to take her back. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the rules, she was warmer than a wall, oh, but smarter than the fools. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the stars, she was guarding something soft that I had no right to mark. She wasn't cold, she was careful, oh, careful as a vow. And I wanted her to know I'd never make her wonder how. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the name, I just wanted her to feel like I wasn't there to claim. She said, you can't want me the way I need. I said, tell me what way. She said, tell me it's not a need that fades when the thrill is gone, when the household gets dull. I said, I want all of you. I want the careful, want the full. And she kissed me back like she'd been holding her breath for every careful year of every quiet death, of every tiny softness she'd had to hide away. And the house was empty and the world stopped its play. She said, you've ruined this house for me. Every room feels small when you're not in it. And I held her through the fall of every brick, every wall, every careful no. She finally let me, finally let go. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the night, she was finally allowed to be soft and still right. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the roll, she was Elena, she was Elena. She was whole, she wasn't cold. She was waiting for someone to see that the careful was the love, that the love was free. Beneath the apron, oh, beneath the name, she was never just the maid, oh, she was never the same. Beneath the apron, oh, you're insufferable when you get serious. That sounds like a good sign. And she smiled, oh, she smiled. First time she'd let it shine. Beneath the apron, she was always there.